79, then, in a very similar theme, very connected to my number 80, and I just like this one a tiny bit more, we have from Season 4 of Enterprise, Babel 1. Again, a similar concept, and it started off one of my favorite three-part storylines within Enterprise, so those parts are kind of in a row here, but Babel 1 starts with the Enterprise transporting a Tellarite ambassador. They then respond to a distress call from an Andorian vessel. They find out that it is Shran, and you get this conflict and interaction between these early Federation founding members, as well as mystery of the surprise attacks by the Romulans as we start building up to what eventually would have been the Romulan War in a Season 5, but the Romulans using their new weapon to try and cast these possible allies against each other, and then things heat up in my number 78 choice, the Enterprise Season 4 episode United, as the conflict reaches new violent heights before finally being resolved, and you have the beginnings of these alliances. We then move into my number 77 choice, Enterprise Season 4 episode The Einar, finishing this up with a fascinating look into a section of Andorian culture and their world, and always been something that I loved, and finishes off this sort of 3-episode in a row section of Enterprise that I have a particular fondness for. And the Einar, I thought it was a very well handled and fascinating look into that culture that we don't necessarily get a whole lot of looks into before this point. More just the conflicts between the Andorians and the Vulcans, and we get more into that cultural exploration, get to really understand Commander Shran on a personal level within these 3 episodes. So one of Jeffrey Combs, one of his best characters, of one of many. Number 76, from the Next Generation's 4th season, we have Half a Life, which is another great example of exploring another alien culture and different sets of values and different perspectives as Lwaxana Troi visits the Enterprise and falls for a visiting scientist played by David Ogden Stiers, which is already a big treat for me, as well as MASH is my second favorite thing behind Star Trek, so that was fantastic, and he's always a great actor, always gives a wonderful performance, and the two of them paired together in their scenes, it was so believable and made it so impactful when you came to the realization that he was due to commit ritual suicide within his culture because of his age. Even though his scientific endeavors were left unfinished, they were to be left to the next generation, and how you have this cultural setup where you did not want to burden your family by reaching a certain age where you kind of fall off the side of the cliff and you become more and more unable to take care of yourself. And it's just an interesting concept, and butting heads with different cultural values, as Lwaxana just cannot wrap her head around this, and how you so much vitality and so much left to give, and her emotional connection and the turmoil of just coming to terms with what is going on, and how much he is really very okay with this after a little bit of his own emotional struggle. And it's just such a fascinating storyline that is anchored by 2 fantastic dramatic performances. Number 75, from the Next Generation's 4th season, Clues. I love a good mystery. I've always been a fan of mysteries, and this is such a fascinating one as the crew of the Enterprise D wakes up from a mysterious blackout after passing through a wormhole and trying to uncover the lost time, and realizing that it's been a lot more than they believe, as Data is actually the one trying to cover everything up. And then you have to figure out, why is he covering things up? What is he covering up? And just the reveal at the end is just a fascinating mystery, and has always been a fun episode. And speaking of fun episodes, we have one of my favorite more comedic episodes from Deep Space Nine's 7th season, Take Me Out to the Holosuite. When a juvenile rivalry gets out of hand, as Captain Sisko meets an old nemesis from his academy days and an infamous wrestling match, it eventually ends up being a fantastic bonding experience throughout this baseball game, and it's great to see the relationships of these characters from a perspective that is not a conflict driven by the war itself. It's to see these other moments and to see these other connections and these explorations of these characters in this other vein, and of course the fantastic humor as well. This is one of my favorite comedic episodes of the series. Worf is great, death to the opposition. It's just a very fun fan favorite episode for a good reason. It's one of the only times where I would ever consider owning a baseball cap if I got one of those Niners caps, because it is just such a fantastic experience and is one of my favorite fun times with the Deep Space Nine crew. And speaking of a fun episode, although a little more of a dramatic element to this one, number 73 from the 2nd season of Enterprise, we have my second favorite episode of Enterprise, Carbon Creek. Yeah, sometimes it is those dramatic multi-part action-packed stories, and other times it's a one-off with a lot of heart, and that is Carbon Creek, where T'Pol is having her usual meal with Archer and Tucker, that trinity that they pull off within Enterprise, trying to mirror the original series in many ways. She tells them a story about her great-grandmother and 2 other Vulcans who crash-landed in a small town in Pennsylvania, my home state, in the 1950s, and it's just fun to see both the story of these Vulcans in this small town, and that's handled so well in its own, but then also the elements of the story being told and them not really believing T'Pol and thinking like there's no way, she's got to be pulling our leg, that changes Earth's history in a radical fashion, because it is well before first contact with the Vulcans, and it's a great example of the relationship of these 3 characters, and it's just fun to see them in the dinner scene and the telling of the story, and then the story itself is fantastic and is a great example of kind of what some of the elements of Star Trek that I really love. Not always the big space battles and not always the death-defying drama, but sometimes these little stories that could work well as their own little short story, even outside of Star Trek. It's just kind of a fun thing to see, and is one of my favorite of that style of episode, and my second favorite in Enterprise. Number 72, the seed of my favorite Star Trek movie, we have the Season 1 TOS episode, Space Seed, where the Enterprise encounters the Botany Bay and revives the genetically engineered world conqueror, Khan. And it's fun to explore a part of Earth's history as that slowly gets, that mythology gets pieced together over the many years of Star Trek. This is one of the earlier parts that adds in a piece of Earth's history that was, and exploring genetic enhancement and the ramifications of that and the morality of it, and then just Khan himself. Ricardo Montalban's performance is fantastic, both here and of course in my favorite Star Trek movie, Wrath of Khan. So this has definitely always been a favorite to explore and is a classic TOS episode for a reason. Number 71 from Deep Space Nine's Season 6, The Sound of Her Voice. This episode has an interesting B story with Quark bringing Jake into one of his schemes and Odo letting him get away with it as Quark helps him out with his celebrating an anniversary with Kira. But the main draw and why I really like this episode is the A story, where the Defiant, coming home weary from a mission, stumbles upon a distress signal from a Starfleet captain who is stranded on a dangerous planet. And they find they're the only ship in the region that could possibly rescue her. Even though they're still several days away at maximum warp, they decide to go ahead and attempt the rescue, and the entire time they are kept in contact with this stranded officer, and they form a bit of a friendship, and the whole episode is situated around these conversations on the comm channel as she gets to know the crew of the Defiant, and they finally arrive to discover that the individual they've been speaking to has actually been dead for several years, and the signals they were receiving and sending were affected by a time shift. And it's just a very heart-wrenching ending to a thoughtful story, to where they actually have a funeral for this individual that they somehow feel like they have gotten to know, even though they were separated by time and never truly met her. So it's an interesting concept and makes for a fun episode. Number 70 from Voyager's third season is Flashback. While exploring an anomaly, Tuvok suddenly starts to have these overwhelming visions of a girl falling to her death with him as a child, and the vision changes over time, and he eventually starts then hallucinating flashbacks to when he was under the command of Captain Sulu on the Excelsior during his first tenure in Starfleet. The episode has a fascinating story in itself, especially when Janeway tries to help Tuvok figure out what all these different images and flashbacks mean, try to figure out what is going on, and she actually joins him in the flashbacks. But besides just being an interesting story, I think it was a really cool kind of television event at the time that this first aired. I remember the previews coming out and be like, wow, and everyone wanted to gather and watch it, was to see Sulu and the Excelsior and the crew from Star Trek VI make a return, and it was, at the time, a backdoor pilot trying to get off the ground the possible idea of a Captain Sulu series, during that time frame, which hasn't been super covered by Star Trek at that point. It never happened, but just seeing that was a really cool backdrop to an already kind of fascinating story. It was just great to see that era of Trek and Sulu, and it was a very unexpected surprise at the time. Number 69 from Star Trek Voyager's 5th season, we have Timeless. The Voyager crew attempts to utilize a new slipstream drive to shorten their journey home, and due in part to a miscalculation by Harry Kim, Voyager crash lands on an icy planet, and everyone on board dies. The ship is stranded, except for Chakotay and Harry Kim, who were in a shuttle attempting to guide Voyager and use those calculations to navigate through the slipstream. They ended up making it home, and we have a fantastic alternate future episode where 15 years later, after much planning and obsession, future Chakotay and Harry Kim hatch a plan, an illegal plan, to try and go back and change what happened to Voyager to save them. And it's a fascinating plan because it's not a typical time travel thing. They're not going to attempt to time travel and go back and physically save Voyager. Instead, they have this plan to use the Doctor's program and the remains of Seven of Nine to send a message back through time to Seven to alter the calculations that Harry Kim makes, and in that moment save Voyager. And even though the attempt basically fails and they don't make it quite as far as they would like to using the new drive, it saves Voyager, and you have a very heartfelt ending where Harry, who feels very guilty after realizing that he would have failed them if the change had not been made at the last moment, gets a message that was sent back in the same form from his future self. And you get a fun little cameo of Geordi LaForge as well, which is a cool little bonus. So overall, just a fantastic episode, and one that's fun to watch over and over again. Number 68, from the first season of the original series, we have Balance of Terror, where the Enterprise encounters the Romulans and has a moment of great tension as they battle a Romulan ship that is suspected of destroying outposts near the neutral zone, and so many questions of trying to balance the situation and play sort of a mental chess game to not start a war over this, as well as discoveries about the Romulans and really getting into a situation where each side is testing the other, trying to get information as they feel very unsure about the other, and finding details of the Romulans that bring a ripple of disturbance through the crew, especially a rather aggressively bigoted bridge officer when the physical similarities between Vulcans and Romulans are discovered. It's a fascinating episode, and even to this day is one of the best examples of ship-to-ship combat in space, in so far as the feeling of almost like two submarines battling it out. It has a lot of like Hunt for Red October kind of feeling in some of the aspects, and the big standout for me has always been Mark Leonard's performance. As he portrays the Romulan commander, the way he plays that out, it is Shakespearean perfection. Like that is the style I would give to that performance. He's fantastic. And it's actually my second favorite overall performance of his in all of Star Trek. And we'll eventually uncover my favorite performance of his as the list goes on. But just an absolute standout, and the episode still has such a powerful form of tension throughout the entire thing, and is very exciting. And out of all the original series, it is one of the episodes that has truly aged the best and still holds the power that it did. Number 67 is one that is typically heralded as one of the best episodes of Star Trek in general, and is usually considered one of the best episodes by far of the original series. We have from Season 1, The City on the Edge of Forever. Dr. McCoy is accidentally stuck with a hypospray and driven temporarily insane, and he escapes to the planet's surface where there is an ancient ruined city and something called the Guardian of Forever, which displays a gateway to the past. And as various images are flashing by, McCoy jumps through and is sent into the past. Kirk and Spock make their best calculations and follow. Showing up a little too early, they have to spend some time living in the past, waiting to make their attempt to rescue Dr. McCoy. And without getting too much into the plot, as I'm sure anyone watching this video has seen this many, many times, it involves a brilliantly written scenario where a very difficult decision is made to allow someone to die to preserve the future. Number 66, the very last episode of Star Trek Picard in the third season, The Last Generation. There were a handful of episodes from that third season of Picard that were in the running for this list. They're ones that probably would have ended up in a top 200 list for sure, many different episodes, but a lot of them was more individual moments within it, that moments with Ro Laren or the last act of an episode like Vox that were very powerful for me and had the emotional connection of a lot of ones that did make the list. But as whole episodes, and it didn't quite, it's too much of one interconnected story that it just didn't quite make it here. But this individual episode just had everything that I could possibly have wanted from it after the lead up through the rest of that season. It was definitely a very emotional experience, and I've talked in depth about it, so I'm not going to go crazy on here, but suffice to say, for a very recent episode of Star Trek to have such an impact as to make it not only on this list but almost halfway up, I really loved that last episode in particular, and it kind of represents the whole of that third season for me and everything that I liked about it. Number 65, we have the Star Trek Voyager premiere, Caretaker, one of my wife's personal favorite episodes of Star Trek, and a lot of why this is here is more, as much as I like the episode a lot and probably would make the list in general, it makes it very high because more about the event surrounding it. Because of my age, Amanda and I both talked about this before. My wife and I are roughly the same age, like 9 months apart. This was the first time that a Star Trek premiered and the whole family gathered, and we were old enough to truly understand and enjoy everything that's going on. We were too young, obviously, for the original series, and for the first couple seasons of TNG, too young to really vividly remember. Deep Space Nine was something that I just kind of watched, and my dad sometimes. It wasn't really a big family event. So my whole family usually watched Next Generation, and then my whole family watched Voyager, and I vividly remember being in the basement of our old house and everyone gathering and watching the premiere and the launch of an entire new TV network, which doesn't mean much now, but it was a big deal back in the day, and watching a new Star Trek launch, and it really felt like, because we were of the age where we could, from the very beginning, have a very memorable connection, it kind of felt like this was our Star Trek, moving forward. I felt like that was kind of like how people a little bit older would feel with the launch of TNG, or our parents with the launch of the original series. So a lot of that emotional connection and really just being excited for the future of a whole new Star Trek franchise. And I do enjoy it. I think it's a great introduction to that series. I love the look of Voyager. I immediately thought Captain Janeway was a fantastic captain. There were other characters in the cast that I really enjoyed right off the bat. So I thought it was a very strong start to a new series, and is one that's always been a favorite. Number 64 from Star Trek Voyager's fourth season is The Raven, another masterful performance by Jeri Ryan as Seven of Nine, as Seven explores her past, and we get a look at what happened to her parents and how she was assimilated by the Borg at such a young age. And it's just a fascinating experience and a powerful look at the past of a character, and really helps add a lot to the emotional journey of that character. And I love that type of exploration. I think this was handled very well, so it ends up being one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Voyager. Number 63 from Star Trek Next Generation's third season, we have Booby Trap. While investigating a 1,000-year-old derelict alien ship, the Enterprise is caught in the same trap that the ship they are investigating was trapped in from a long-forgotten war. And it's just a fascinating concept in general. I love exploring the past, and whenever we get a glimpse into alien cultures that have come and gone, and seeing the bridge of that ship and exploring it, it's just a really cool idea. And that in itself, just exploring that element of a chapter of history long before the Federation and a spacefaring society long before Earth could even consider such a thing, was a cool concept by itself. And then you also have the tension of the Enterprise trying to get out of this trap, so you get kind of a 2-for-1 for me here, two things that I enjoy. And in trying to solve the problem, we have the B story of Geordi. His failed romantic life collides with him trying to solve this issue with the Enterprise, where he decides to have a holodeck recreation of one of the designers of elements of the Enterprise D, Dr. Leah Brahms, to help him solve this puzzle in time. And it's an interesting dilemma that is carried on into a future episode when Geordi, who falls romantically for this holodeck recreation, when he meets the real Dr. Brahms in the future. That's a rather awkward situation, but it's just an interesting B story that ties in very well with the tension of the plot, and I think it's a fantastic episode.